Very special thanks once again to Cars of Somerset, of course, for providing the car in this review, a Panamera on this occasion, and of course if you want to check out cars like this in their current stock list, then click the link right below this video in the description, and if a vehicle which you like in a review has already sold, which chances are from them it has because their turnover is very quick, don't worry, you can always ask them to, for instance, source you a car across the UK as well. Those who have been watching my reviews for quite some time on the channel may remember that last year I reviewed a first generation Panamera, and that of course was the GTS. A very different model to this one, but a very significant one for me, because it was kind of a turning point in my feelings about the Panamera, wherein before that I respected it but didn't like the way it looked. And then afterward, especially in the weeks after driving the car, the more I thought about it, and the more I compared it to other things that I'd driven at the time, and even that I've driven up until now, I love the Panamera, to the point where I actually want one in future, probably a turbo. But here's the interesting thing. This car almost couldn't be any more different to that one. It's not just a facelift, of course it's improved in many ways, but just the goal and the purpose of the car itself is so different. The GTS is to the Panamera what the GT3 is to the 911. There's no turbos, it's much more purely focused on the driving pleasure and the performance and just being more of a raw experience. And that's part of the reason why those first generation GTS Panameras tend to keep more of their value than even something like the turbo does. This one though, the V6 Hybrid, is totally different. And yet, even though it's much more focused on being quote-unquote sensible in a way, this is legitimately faster than that GTS was. This car has about 460 horsepower, 516 pound-feet of torque, and that's from a 2.9 litre V6 combined of course with electric power. Now the interesting thing about this car is yes, it's a hybrid, but you could actually run it in effect like a Taycan. Now, it's not going to have the range of a Taycan, but you can run it up to about 30 miles on just electric charging. So you can plug it in at home, charge it up on a quick charge for 4 hours or a full charge for 6, and then drive it up to 20-30 miles around town for instance, city commute in London or whatever, and actually never put fuel in it. Or of course you could put petrol in it and then have the advantage of the extra performance and the extra range, which of course is what most people will do. Now it's hard to work out stuff like exact fuel economy with a vehicle like this because it's going to be all over the place. You could judge it using electric power, without electric power, engine only, motors only. You're looking at some pretty crazy claims. Some will say like 85 to the gallon average. It doesn't really work out that way unless you're probably just driving in the city, but again, it depends on the kind of driving you're going to do. And one of the things which I think you really should bear in mind about this car is if you go into this expecting a Prius, you're buying the wrong car. This vehicle, despite being a hybrid, is not about being the most economical thing around, because think of it this way. If this car was designed to be the most economical choice of hybrid, kind of in effect replacing what the diesel was in the first generation, which of course they no longer sell, well then they wouldn't have given it 460 horsepower because that simply uses more power and more fuel. So this is not a hybrid in that sense, this is a hybrid in the more performance sense, such as a 918 Spider, which of course came before it. Now this one runs from about 2017, technically up until now, but the updated version, which looks pretty much identical, has even more power and even better performance. This will run 4.6 seconds to 60, about 4.4 with the chrono pack. It has an 8-speed PDK gearbox, and it will go all the way up to 172 miles an hour. Now the newer version will do about 180, 0 to 60 drops to I believe it's something like 3.5 seconds, which is nuts. In other words, this V6 hybrid can eclipse the previous generation's turbo model, which again just goes to show how much an update can do. But it also highlights a massively important point to me, which is one of the reasons why I love the Panamera so much, and that is that Porsche, crucially, never rests on their laurels. They never just make a great car and say, okay, that's it, we're done. They constantly refine it, to the point where it's actually one of the biggest jokes in the automotive world, how the 911 just looks the same and keeps getting refined. Well, yeah, that's the point. If you take something and keep refining it, it's going to become better and better. So even though it is a joke, a well-founded joke, it has grounds in reality, because look how overwhelmingly good the 911 was and still is all the way up until today. And they're doing the same thing with the Panamera. And when you add on top of that the fact that you can buy it as this slightly more sensible hybrid form, or you could go for the Turbo S hybrid, which of course with the addition of the Sport Turismo Estate version, which was not available in the first gen, and incidentally I actually like the Sport Turismo more than the sedan version when it comes to this generation. I think it really suits that shape. It is incidentally the most powerful estate car you can buy, with 670 horsepower, which is nuts. It eclipses Mercedes AMGs and Audi RS6s. And again, that has that electric power thrown in there as well for extra efficiency over those kind of cars. All of this is to say that they should be worried. As the thumbnail of this video implies, I believe the Panamera is not just a threat, it's a class leader. I would put the Panamera almost in a different category technically to a conventional quote-unquote super saloon, because the super saloon is more of a concept of taking an executive car and then putting a crazy powerful engine into it, and that's great. There have been some fantastic ones here on the channel, Jag XFR, Mercedes E55, etc. But these are almost separate to that. And that's even according to Porsche themselves. They refer to this not so much as a super saloon, but as a four-seater, four-door GT car, which is accurate, because that's exactly what it feels like. I would put this one in more of a category of its own, along with potentially the Aston Martin Rapide, and maybe even the Maserati Quattroporte. Those cars which are not just super saloons, they're exotics which happen to have four doors. And another point to highlight why I believe these other manufacturers should be so legitimately concerned about the Panamera's threat is because if you do this as a little test in your own time, go to your friends who may be car fans, maybe you know that they don't like the Panamera, for example, or even if they do, ask them to give you a downside to the Panamera. Ask them to tell you the worst thing they can think of about the car. If they can think of anything at all, it tends to always be the same thing. I don't like the way it looks. Well, what I would argue is if that's the best thing you can come up with, that says a hell of a lot about how outstandingly good the rest of the car is. Because think of it this way. The Panamera has the engineering and the forward-thinking ideals of some kind of weird mishmash of Porsche and Tesla. But unlike Tesla, this has better quality, better fit and finish, and more reliability. Superior reliability. It has the kind of forward-thinking, never resting on your laurels performance approach of Porsche, which they've always had. It has the sheer performance easily on par with many supercars, or at least super sports cars, let alone four-door vehicles. It has the ride quality, the attention to detail of something like a Mercedes. It has the forward-thinking, clever tech of a Honda or a BMW level machine. It's just literally everything put together, except you have the badge panache of Porsche, you have supercar levels of road presence, and even though the looks aren't for everyone, you cannot deny that both the one I drove before and this one, at least in my experience of looking at other drivers and pedestrians, everyone looks at a Panamera. They don't necessarily all love it, but it does attract a huge amount of attention. This is not a sleeper car. It's not a Q car, which many super saloons can be. This is an overtly attractive, eye-catching vehicle. And all of these put together are basically the reasons why I love it so much. The Panamera is a vehicle which, much like some of my other favourite vehicles of all time, including my actual dream car, the Ferrari FF, which is a fantastic rival to the Sport Turismo, even though of course they weren't around at the same time technically, it's a vehicle which proves that you don't have to be pigeonholed. You don't have to just identify as a super saloon, or just as a wagon, or just as a sports car. You can be a vehicle which simultaneously can do everything. The Ferrari FF proved that for that brand, something which they'd never done before, an all-wheel drive wagon. So many things could have gone wrong. Likewise for Porsche with the Panamera, the first one was hugely controversial on the looks, and I'm sure there are still people who don't like this one either. But as I said earlier on, If the looks are the best thing you can come up with, then, well, you're going to need to do better than that, objectively speaking, because that's just a personal preference. The fact is, it's fast, it's stunning, it's very well made, extremely comfortable. In the case of one like this, it's even more economical, and it's not just about the miles per gallon. It has barely any tax cost, emissions are super low, you still get the nice V6 exhaust note and the great performance when you want it. Again, best of both worlds kind of thing. It's almost like having a Porsche and a Tesla, so you don't have to choose one or the other. You can do both, fully electric, fully petrol, or a combination if you want it. The only slight gripe which I had, and I actually cross-referenced some other articles and reviews and outlets online, and it's not just me who felt this, is the brakes. And the issue with the brakes is that because it's kind of a tandem system, it has a regen quality to it, plus conventional discs. The problem comes in where those two ideas marry together. Because I personally find that when driving this car in, for instance, slower traffic or start-stop traffic around town or in a pile-up, you kind of switch sometimes between this feeling of the brakes not quite being powerful enough and then almost bringing you to, sometimes at least, too much of an abrupt halt at low speeds. Like, they kind of fluctuate in terms of how powerful the brakes are. That could be a little bit annoying for some people, but I think it's more of a teething issue, and although this isn't the 2021 shape update, I'm sure that one improves on that even more, and doubtless the next generation will even more. I'm sure the Taycan, for example, improves on that again as a pure electric vehicle as well. Even compared to the Taycan, which is probably my favourite electric car on the market, even though I haven't actually driven one yet, but I could imagine based on this it probably will be. Well, this, I would argue, is even better than that, because here you have the choice. That one's fully electric, this one you still have the choice between the two. And even though, personally, I wouldn't buy the hybrid, because it's just not what I'm looking for in a car, if you do enjoy that kind of clever tech, which is expertly put together and genuinely useful, crucially, well, there's not really much else which can rival just how great this is across the board. In terms of pricing, well, of course, being a newer, much higher market vehicle, none of these are going to be the kind of, Jag XK prices that I would usually talk about. You're talking about 50 grand for a 2017 shape, so in other words, one of the earliest ones. If you get a brand new one with those 2021 or 2020 updates, you're looking at about 130, 135,000 pounds brand new, which again compares very nicely to something like a Tesla. So it's competitive as well. It's not like Porsche are charging ridiculous prices for it. They're actually very competitive, and used you can get kind of a bargain in comparison to a lot of its rivals. Across the board, I find it a very impressive vehicle in hybrid form or otherwise. I think the Panamera, as crazy as this may sound, may well be, in my opinion, the best car you can buy, because it literally can do everything. Especially now that they have it in an estate form as well, because it has even more space and still looks fantastic while doing so, and is the most powerful wagon in the world at the same time. So it's like they just made their own list, made a load of boxes to tick, and then just ticked every single one of them, because the Panamera kind of feels like the ultimate Swiss Army knife car of the exotic world. Overall then, as you can kind of tell, I would at least recommend test driving one if you have the chance. If you are on more of a budget, then I would definitely recommend looking into the 970 shape, the earlier generation Panamera, such as the GTS that I drove. You can get those for about 30,000-35,000 in the UK now. A turbo, like the one that I want, you can get for more like 25,000. And if you go down to, for instance, the 250 horsepower diesel, you can even go under 20 grand. But of course they stopped selling the diesels in these later forms for the emissions reasons primarily, and switched more to the hybrids. If your budget is higher, chances are you're going to be looking at a newer car, and there's certainly a lot to love. It has a fantastic interior as well. The space, incidentally, is outstanding, which again doesn't surprise me because the older one was fantastic as well. Across the board, it's a great car, and for want of not repeating myself anymore, it goes without saying, you should check one out. If you're in the market for something like this, certainly give it a look, and of course, stick around on the channel for more car reviews, and until next time, I'll see you then. But for now, as always, thanks for watching.